He laughed at me in my own home until my son walked in. Before starting the story, please subscribe and like the video and listen through end for chill. I used to believe respect came automatically with age. I was wrong. It started small, the kind of things you convince yourself not to take personally. My son-in-law, Derek, would correct me mid-sentence. He'd laugh when I mispronounced new tech terms. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about how things used to be. At first, I thought he was just immature, but immaturity doesn't linger. Mockery does. Derek married my daughter Claire 5 years ago. He was charming in public, sharp in conversation, and very aware of how impressive he appeared to others. He worked in finance, wore tailored suits even to casual dinners, and loved reminding people, especially me, that he was self-made. I was a retired machinist, 40 years in the same factory. Early mornings, calloused hands, a pension I was grateful for, but nothing flashy. To Derek, that made me invisible. Every family gathering followed the same pattern. Derek would dominate the conversation, sprinkling in comments like, "You probably didn't have to deal with this kind of stress back in your day." It's wild how simple jobs used to be. No offense, but times have changed. He always added "no offense," as if that made it clean. Claire noticed, but she stayed quiet. She loved her husband, and I loved my daughter too much to make her choose sides, so I swallowed it. Until the night I couldn't. It was a Saturday night. Claire and Derek invited a few friends over, colleagues of his mostly. People in sleek clothes talking about investments, promotions, and vacations that cost more than my annual grocery bill. I was already uncomfortable when Derek clinked his glass. "Hey everyone," he said, smiling. "My father-in-law here has a classic story about how he used to fix machines with duct tape and prayer. You should tell it, Jim." The table laughed. I felt my face burn. "I think I'll pass," I said quietly. Derek leaned back, smirked. "Come on, it's cute, like a museum exhibit." That word hit harder than he realized. Museum. Old. Finished. I looked around the table. No one defended me. Some looked away, others waited, uncomfortable but silent. Then Derek added, casually, "I mean, no disrespect, but you had it easy. One job your whole life, no competition, no pressure. You wouldn't last a week now." That's when the front door opened. The sound of the door cut through the room like a blade. My son Michael stepped inside. I hadn't known he was coming. He took in the scene slowly. Wine glasses, half-eaten plates, Derek leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Michael hung his coat calmly. Then he said, "What wouldn't Dad last a week doing?" The room froze. Derek straightened. "Oh, hey man, just joking around." Michael nodded, walked to the table, and set his keys down, slowly. "You were saying my father had it easy." Derek chuckled nervously. "I mean, different times, right?" Michael smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Interesting, because I remember Dad working double shifts so Mom could stay home with us. I remember him missing birthdays. I remember him paying for my college when he could barely walk from back pain. Silence. Michael turned to Derek. "You know what else?" he continued. "That simple factory job you mock, the one you think was easy?" He paused. "He co-founded the company you work for." Derek blinked. "What?" Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Dad and 2 others built the first production line in the 90s. When the company went public, he didn't chase titles. He kept his shares. Derek's face drained of color. Michael added, almost casually, "You manage one of the divisions he still owns." The table was dead silent. I felt my chest tighten, not from pride, but from the realization that my son had been carrying this knowledge quietly, protectively. Derek stammered, I didn't know." "No," Michael said, "you didn't bother to ask." He turned to the guests. "My father doesn't talk about money or status or power. but if you're sitting at this table because of this company," he gestured lightly, "you're here because of him." No one laughed now. Derek opened his mouth again, but Michael held up a hand. "One more thing," he said. "You don't get to disrespect someone just because they don't brag." Then he looked directly at Derek. "If you ever speak to my father like that again, you won't have to worry about surviving a week in this economy." The meaning was clear. Derek nodded quickly. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible. Not to Michael, to me. The rest of the night passed in awkward politeness. Guests left early, conversations stayed shallow. When the door finally closed behind the last person, Derek didn't say another word. Claire came to me later, eyes wet. "I should have stopped it sooner." I hugged her. "You stopped it now." Michael stayed behind, helped me wash dishes like he used to as a kid. "I didn't know you felt like you had to hide it," I said quietly. He shrugged. "You taught me that real strength doesn't announce itself." I learned that night that silence is often misunderstood as weakness, that humility invites disrespect from the wrong people, and that the loudest people in the room are rarely the strongest. Most of all, I learned this: you don't need to defend your worth. Sometimes the truth arrives on its own, walks through the door, and shuts everything down without raising its voice. And when it does, even the loudest mockers finally learn how to be quiet. That night didn't end when the dishes were done. After Michael left, I sat alone at the kitchen table long after the lights were dimmed. The house felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath. My hands rested where my coffee mug had gone cold, and for the first time in years, my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with age. Not because Derek had apologized, but because someone had finally seen me. For decades, I had been the background figure, the reliable one, the man who showed up, fixed things, paid bills, and didn't ask for applause. I thought that was how dignity worked. You earn it quietly. But silence, I realized, can slowly erase you if no one speaks your name out loud. I went to bed that night replaying Derek's words in my head, not the cruel ones, but the ones after, the apology, the way his shoulders slumped, the way power shifted so fast it almost scared him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. The next morning, Claire came over alone. She didn't knock, she never does. She just walked in, eyes puffy, holding 2 coffees like an offering. "I didn't sleep," she said. Neither had I. We sat on the porch, the early light spilling over the railing. Birds moved freely across the yard, unaware that something inside that house had broken and something else had healed. "I let him do that to you," she said finally, "because it was easier than confronting him." I shook my head. "You didn't let him, he chose it." She swallowed hard, but I stayed quiet. That hit me, not like a wound, but like a truth finally spoken. "I stayed quiet too," I said. "For years, we both learned the same habit." She cried then, quietly, like she used to as a kid when she didn't want to wake her brother. I put my arm around her. "You don't owe me protection, but you do owe yourself a voice." She nodded, slowly. Derek didn't come around for a while after that. When he did, he was different, quieter, careful with his words. He asked questions instead of making statements. He listened, really listened when I spoke, not because he was afraid of what I owned, but because he had finally understood what I had built. One afternoon, he stood beside me in the garage while I fixed an old lawnmower. "You never learned how to do this stuff," he said. I smiled faintly. "You can." He hesitated. Then he said, "Would you show me?" That moment mattered more than any apology, because respect isn't proven in grand gestures. It's shown in who's willing to stand beside you and learn. Even now, months later, I still think about that night, not with anger, but but with clarity. I think about how many parents sit quietly at tables like that, shrinking to make room for louder voices. How many people confuse humility with weakness? How many lives of effort get reduced to punchlines? And I think about my son, about how he didn't raise his voice, didn't insult anyone, didn't even brag. He just told the truth. That's the kind of strength that lasts. If you're reading this and you've ever felt small in a room you helped build, if you've ever been mocked for choosing a quiet life, if your sacrifices went unnoticed because you didn't announce them, know this: your story doesn't disappear just because you stop telling it. Sometimes someone else carries it for you, and when the moment comes, they set it down gently, right where it belongs, and suddenly the room understands. And the silence, it's not empty. It's respect finally catching up. Weeks passed and something subtle changed inside me. I stopped shrinking, not in a dramatic way, no speeches, no confrontations, but in the small moments that used to steal my breath. I spoke when I had something to say. I didn't rush my words. I didn't laugh things off to make others comfortable. It surprised me how foreign that felt. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, the same face, the same lines carved by years of early mornings and late nights, but my eyes looked different, steadier, like they finally believed they were allowed to take up space. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd folded away just to keep peace. Michael came by one evening after work. No announcement, no reason, just sat with me on the back steps as the sun slipped down behind the trees. "I hope you know," he said, staring straight ahead. I didn't say those things for him. I nodded. "I know. I said them for you." That cracked something open. I cleared my throat. "I never wanted you kids to think money was the point." He smiled softly. "We never did. We thought you were the point." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cicadas filled the silence, loud, unapologetic, alive. "I learned how to be steady from you," he added, "how to keep going without needing credit." I felt tears rise then, unexpected and uninvited. Because parents don't often hear what they did right. We mostly hear what we missed. Later that night, lying in bed, I realized something painful and freeing at the same time. I had spent years confusing endurance with invisibility. I thought strength meant not reacting, not correcting, not claiming space. But strength, real strength, isn't about how much you can take. It's about knowing when you no longer have to. I had already paid my dues, already proven myself. The rest was just habit. Claire changed too. She began interrupting Derek when he slipped into old patterns, not sharply, just firmly. "That's not fair. Let him finish." That wasn't kind. Each time, Derek paused, listened, adjusted. And each time, I felt a small, quiet relief. Not because she was defending me, but because she was learning to defend herself. One evening, she hugged me before leaving and whispered, "I don't want to be quiet anymore." I kissed her hair. Neither did I. I just didn't know it yet. Now, when I sit at family dinners, the table feels different. Not louder, not softer, just honest. I still don't talk about money or ownership or influence. Those things never defined me. What defines me is this: I showed up. I stayed. I built something that lasted, inside my children, not just in the world. And if someone ever mistakes my calm for weakness again, I won't wait for someone else to speak. Because I finally understand my voice doesn't need permission. My worth doesn't need proof. And respect doesn't arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, right after the moment you decide you're done being small. Life didn't suddenly turn poetic after that, There were still ordinary mornings, still bills, still aches in my knees when the weather changed, but something inside me had shifted, and once that happens, you can't unknow it. I noticed it most in the quiet moments, at the grocery store, when the cashier rushed me and I didn't apologize for taking an extra second, at the doctor's office when I asked questions instead of nodding politely, at family gatherings when I held my seat at the table instead of drifting toward the edge. These weren't acts of rebellion, they were acts of recognition. One Sunday afternoon, Derek and I found ourselves alone in the backyard. He was struggling with the old grill, muttering under his breath. I watched for a moment before stepping in. "Try adjusting the vent first," I said. He did. The flame steadied. He exhaled. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I grew up thinking respect was something you demanded." I stayed quiet. "My father was loud. If you weren't the strongest voice in the room, you didn't matter." He finally met my eyes. "You never raised your voice." I mistook that for weakness. I nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. "That mistake costs people a lot," I said gently. He swallowed. "I'm trying to unlearn it." That was enough for me. Months went by, holidays came and went. The world outside stayed loud, impatient, always proving something. But inside our family, things slowed. Michael still checked in, not to guard me, but to share his life. Claire laughed more freely. Derek listened more than he spoke. And I began telling stories again. Not the impressive ones, just the real ones. About mistakes, about fear, about the nights I wasn't sure I was doing anything right. No one laughed. They leaned in. One evening, my grandson, small hands, curious eyes, climbed onto my lap and asked, "Grandpa, what do you do?" The question stopped me. I could have said what I used to say. I worked in a factory. I could have listed titles, timelines, accomplishments. Instead, I said, "I built things so people could have easier lives." He thought about that, then smiled. "That's a good job." It felt like a benediction. I understand something now that took me most of my life to learn. You don't lose your power by being quiet. You lose it by believing silence is the same as absence. I was never absent. I was watching, learning, building. And when the time came, when the room needed truth instead of noise, it arrived steady and undeniable, not as a shout, but as a presence that no one could ignore. If that story gave you chill, drop a like, subscribe, and comment so I know you made it to the end. I've got another one. See you then.